Chapter 1. The summer air in Seattle was warm, heavy with the smell of city traffic and overripe blackberries on the sidewalks. It was a kind of evening when the sky looked painted, orange and pink stretched across the horizon, and yet the group of 6 friends returning from their camping trip looked anything but picturesque. They filed off the bus in various states of exhaustion. Lobby, tall and broad-shouldered at 18, dragged his duffel like it had been filled with rocks instead of camping gear. His twin sister, Samantha, looked equally tired, her long hair tangled from 3 days of humidity and sleep deprivation. Behind them came Isabella, brushing dirt off her jeans as if she could erase the fact that she had slipped down a muddy hill earlier that morning. Bobby, 19, staggered with a cooler that had been empty for hours but which he stubbornly refused to abandon. George, 20, carried himself with a casual confidence that made him the natural center of attention wherever he went. And then there was a silence, the missing space where Tabby should have been. It was impossible to ignore. Tabby had once been the leader of this mismatched collection of friends. At 22, he was older, stronger, and sharper than all of them, but he had moved away the year before. No one really knew why, only that he had left, and with his absence came the kind of shadow that lingered over conversations even when no one spoke his name. Still, the group did what they always did. They filled the silence with noise. That was the worst idea in the history of mankind, Isabella declared as they reached the front steps of Samantha and Lobby's apartment building. She pressed the back of her hand to her forehead like a tragic actress on stage. Camping. 3 days in the wilderness. I'll never forgive any of you. You screamed at a pine cone, Bobby reminded her flatly. It was large, Isabella argued, and threatening. Lobby rolled his eyes as he opened the door for them. You all complained too much. It wasn't that bad. You snored like a chainsaw, Isabella shot back. That wasn't me. That was Bobby, Lobby countered. Bobby looked personally offended. I do not snore. Please, Samantha muttered, brushing past him. Even the raccoons ran away from your tent. For a moment, laughter softened the exhaustion. They were messy, argumentative, and loud, but that had always been the rhythm of their friendship. Their mothers had been inseparable when they were children, and somewhere along the years, the kids had inherited that bond. Now they were adults or close enough to pretend, and yet their worlds still revolved around one another. Inside the apartment, Isabella collapsed dramatically onto the couch. Bobby flopped onto the carpet with his phone, and George followed Samantha into the kitchen, the easy familiarity between them impossible not to notice. George and Samantha were the only official couple in the group, though no one said much about it. From the kitchen, George's low voice carried into the room. Admit it, you had fun. Samantha gave him a look that could wither flowers. There was a centipede in my sleeping bag. That's not fun. That's trauma. George only grinned, unfazed. Tabby would have loved it, though. He'd have made it worse for all of us on purpose. The name hung in the air. Even Lobby, rummaging through cabinets for snacks, paused for just a fraction of a second. It was true. Tabby would have loved the campfire stories, the burned marshmallows, the arguments over who forgot the bug spray. He would have made it louder, funnier, and maybe even bearable. But Tabby wasn't there. He hadn't been there for a year, and no one knew if he'd ever come back. For now, all they could do was laugh about it, pretend the hole wasn't there, and carry on. The summer had only just begun. Chapter 2. It was a quiet night in Seattle, the kind that always seemed just a little too calm for its own good. The city's skyline glowed faintly under a veil of clouds, and in the apartment buildings scattered across downtown, lights blinked in windows like 1,000 little secrets. Inside those apartments, 6 friends were spread across the city, 2 tired from their camping trip to meet in person, but 2 restless not to talk. A group call had been set up, and now their voices tangled together through static, each of them in their own space yet still connected. I'm just saying, Isabella's voice came clear over the speaker. If one more pine cone had fallen near me, I would have sued the forest. On the other end, Bobby's laugh erupted. You can't sue nature, Isabella. Watch me, she shot back. George was half laughing, half distracted. I think you're just mad you didn't win at campfire charades. Don't bring that up, Isabella groaned, rolling onto her back in bed. Her small studio apartment felt even smaller tonight, the walls closing in with shadows. You cheated. Everyone knows you cheated. George smirked into the phone, though only Samantha could see it from across the couch in his apartment. You just can't handle losing. Samantha cut in before Isabella could retort. Can you two argue less loudly? Some of us are trying to eat dinner in peace. Lobby's voice joined, muffled with a crunch of chips. Some of us are trying to eat dinner, period. The call dissolved into laughter, overlapping voices, the sound of people who had known each other long enough to bicker like family. For a while, it felt normal again. And then it happened. At first, Isabella thought it was just her imagination. A faint rattle against the window pane. A vibration, so subtle it might have been the neighbors slamming their door. She frowned, sitting up in bed. Hold on, she said into the phone. Did anyone else feel that? Feel what? Bobby asked. The floor, Isabella whispered, as if speaking louder might make it worse. The reply came in the form of a deep, groaning sound that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Her lamp shuddered on the nightstand. A picture frame clattered to the floor. Oh my God, Isabella breathed, and then the world broke loose. The apartment shook violently, as if some giant had picked up the building and decided to give a good shake just for fun. Isabella screamed as her bookshelf lurched forward, spilling half its contents onto the floor. Glass shattered in the kitchen. Somewhere above her, something heavy crashed with a thud that rattled her bones. Earthquake! Lobby shouted through the phone. His voice was panicked, uncharacteristically high-pitched. It's a freaking earthquake. Samantha's voice was sharp, cutting through the chaos. Get under a table, Isabella. But Isabella couldn't move. She stood frozen, watching as her television tipped forward and smashed face first into the carpet. The floor rolled beneath her feet, knocking her sideways into the dresser. Another crash echoed from down the hall, followed by a blood-curdling scream from a neighbor she didn't even know. Her body jolted into motion. She dove under her desk just as another tremor rattled the walls, plastered dust drifting down like snow. The phone slipped from her hand, but she could still hear the others shouting. Lobby yelling for Samantha to stay put, Bobby cursing, George trying to sound calm but failing miserably. The quake seemed endless, stretching time into a blur of noise and terror. Isabella hugged her knees to her chest, every nerve screaming. The building groaned like it might collapse, pipes screeching, walls cracking. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the shaking stopped. For a moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that rings in your ears, louder than sound. Isabella's breathing came fast and uneven, her chest tight. Is everyone okay? George's voice finally broke through on the phone, faint and trembling. I think so, Samantha whispered. Bobby coughed. My ramen is on the floor, but yeah, I'm alive. Isabella? Lobby demanded. Talk to us. You good. Isabella crawled out from under her desk, her legs shaking. Her apartment looked like a war zone. Shelves broken. Glass everywhere. A crack split across the wall, like a jagged scar. Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard. I'm alive, but I don't know how long this building's gonna stay standing. As if on cue, another aftershock shivered to the floor, smaller, but enough to send her heart racing again. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and stumbled toward the door. The hallway outside was chaotic. Neighbors were screaming, some rushing for the stairs, others frozen in shock. A woman clutched a crying baby to her chest. A man was dragging his dog on a leash, shouting into his own phone. The air smelled of dust and fear. Isabella pushed forward, heart hammering, down the stairwell, step by step, as aftershocks rattled the rails. At one landing, she passed an old man who had fallen. Struggling to get up, she grabbed his arm without thinking, hauling him to his feet. Go! She shouted, though her voice wavered. We have to get out. By the time she reached the street, the full scope of the disaster hit her. Seattle, the city of coffee and tech startups, looked unrecognizable. Buildings leaned crookedly against each other. Windows shattered in glittering piles across the pavement. Sirens wailed in the distance, already too late. People crowded the sidewalks, crying, shouting, clutching loved ones. And everywhere, the sound of more destruction, distant crashes, alarms, the city unraveling. Isabella stood frozen, her hands trembling at her sides. For the first time in her life, she felt very small. The group call had gone silent. Maybe the lines had dropped. Maybe everyone else was facing their own chaos. But in that moment, she was alone, one person in a city that had just changed forever. She whispered to herself, though no one could hear, What do we do now? The summer had turned, and nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 3. 2 months passed. 2 long, restless months after the earthquake split their world open. Seattle hadn't been the same since. The skyline still bore the scars of collapsed buildings. Entire neighborhoods were nothing but rubble, fenced-off zones of twisted metal and brick where families had once lived. For the 6 friends, life became smaller, tighter, heavier. Rent went up, jobs became scarce, and even laughter felt different. Shorter, quieter, as if everyone was afraid the ground might punish them for sounding too alive. And now, on an August morning sticky with heat, the 6 of them were crowded into the narrow seats of a commercial airplane, leaving behind everything they had known. Lobby sat stiffly, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the window as the plane taxied down the runway. Samantha sat beside him, twisting her fingers together in her lap. A row behind them, Isabella leaned her head against the window, trying not to think about how badly her stomach hated flying. Bobby had earbuds in, but the volume was loud enough that tinny music spilled out, an annoying constant. And then there was George, sitting calm, almost too calm, like he belonged everywhere he went. He was always like that, Samantha thought bitterly. Always sure, always steady. And once again, he was the only one who looked like he wasn't terrified. The engines roared, and the plane lifted into the air. Isabella pressed her forehead against the glass and watched as Seattle grew smaller and smaller, until it was nothing but a fractured toy city, gray and broken. Her chest tightened. She whispered to herself, though no one heard, "Goodbye." Half an hour into the flight, the group conversation finally began. "Okay," Bobby said, tugging out one earbud. "So, tell me again, why are we doing this? Why are we moving to the hood?" Samantha glared at him. "Because it's the only place we can afford. Unless you're secretly a millionaire, in which case, congratulations, you've been hiding it very well." Bobby opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He wasn't a millionaire. He was barely a hundredaire. "It's not just cheap," Lobby added grimly. "It's the cheapest. Food, rent, utilities, everything." And after the earthquake, he trailed off. No one needed him to finish. They all knew. Jobs had dried up. Savings had drained. Bills didn't stop just because the world shook itself apart. George leaned back, his voice smooth as ever. "But you've all heard the stories, right? About the gangs. About the shootings. The hood isn't a neighborhood. It's a battlefield." Samantha flinched at the word. Battlefield. It sounded too final, too permanent. "Don't exaggerate," Isabella muttered, though her voice was thin. "It's not a war zone. People live there." "People live in war zones, too," George replied. His tone wasn't cruel, just matter-of-fact. That almost made it worse. The rest of the flight passed in uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional jolt of turbulence. When they landed, the air outside the airport was hotter, heavier, and carried a smell Isabella couldn't place. Something metallic like rust or smoke. A bus took them the rest of the way. The city around them blurred past the windows. Cracked sidewalks, spray-painted walls, corner stores with bars on windows. People stared as the bus rumbled by, their eyes sharp and watchful. No one spoke. Even Bobby kept his music off now. The bus jolted to a stop, and one by one, they filed out onto the sidewalk. Isabella clutched the strap of her bag, so tightly her knuckles whitened. The neighborhood was louder here. Car horns blaring, voices shouting in the distance, the steady thump of bass from a car stereo somewhere nearby. The group split to head toward their new apartments. Isabella found herself walking alone, dragging her suitcase down a crack street until she reached the squat building that would be her new home. The paint was peeling. The stairs creaked under her weight. Inside, the apartment was small, a single room with a kitchenette shoved against one wall, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, and a window that looked out over an alley filled with overflowing trash bins. She dropped her bag in a corner and sat on the mattress that pretended to be a bed. The springs groaned beneath her. She let out a long breath, staring at the ceiling. "This is it," she whispered. "This is home." But her voice wavered, because the truth was, it didn't feel like home. It felt like the beginning of something else, something darker, something she wasn't sure she wanted to be part of. She lay back, closed her eyes, and told herself over and over, it's going to have to work. Outside in the streets of the hood, voices rose and engines roared. The city breathed around her, heavy and unforgiving. And summer, now August, pressed on. Chapter 4. Samantha didn't plan on exploring the neighborhood. Not yet. The sensible thing would have been to stay in her new apartment, unpack the rest of her boxes, and maybe light a candle to cover up the faint smell of cabbage that seemed permanently soaked into the wallpaper. But the air in that tiny space was thick and stale, and her thoughts were louder than the traffic outside. So she stepped out. Just a short walk, she told herself. Clear the head, stretch the legs. Nothing dramatic. The street was different in daylight. The kind of different that made her stomach flip. Sidewalk cracks ran like veins, weeds pushing stubbornly through them. Storefronts sat quiet, shutters pulled halfway, as though everyone was half expecting trouble and didn't want to be caught unprepared. Murals of color bled into scrawled words on the walls. Layers of paint that told stories Samantha wasn't sure she wanted to understand. She pressed her earbuds in, letting tinny music play, and tried to pretend she was anywhere else. Step after step, she counted quietly in her head. 1, 2, 3. It felt like a game, like if she just reached 100, she'd find something familiar. A coffee shop, maybe. A bookstore. Some piece of the world she used to know. At step 93, the game ended. They were leaning against an old car. 3 of them, their conversation breaking off when they noticed her. Their eyes followed her in a way that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand tall. They weren't much older than her, but the hood had a way of adding years. "Hey!" one of them called, sharp enough to cut through her music. Samantha kept walking, head down, earbuds in. "You new around here?" He tried again, this time louder. Her pulse quickened. She didn't answer. If she could just get to the corner. But another voice came, more familiar, one that made her heart stop. "Samantha?" She turned, startled. And there he was, Lobby. His presence knocked the air out of her chest. He wasn't leaning casually like the others. He was standing with them, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, chin tilted in a way that made him seem older, sharper, almost unrecognizable. "Lobby," she breathed. Relief and confusion tangled inside her. You're here." He gave a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, I told you I'd been around." The other guys glanced between the 2 of them, smirks forming like they'd stumbled into some inside joke. One nudged Lobby with his elbow. "You know her?" Lobby hesitated, just for a second, but Samantha caught it. Then he nodded. "Yeah, she's fine. She's with me." The words should have comforted her, but they didn't. They hung in the hot summer air like a promise that wasn't entirely safe. The leader of the 3, a tall guy with a baseball cap pulled low, studied her closely. "If she's with you, she'd better learn quick. This isn't a tourist block." Samantha felt her throat tighten. She didn't know whether to defend herself, apologize, or bolt back to her apartment. Instead, she looked at Lobby, silently begging for an explanation. Lobby's expression softened, almost apologetic. "Samantha, these are the people I roll with here. It's not like back home. Things work different." One of the others stepped closer, his smile wide but cold. "You don't just wander these streets, girl. You walk with someone or you don't walk at all." The moment pressing around her, thick and unshakable. She glanced at the car behind them, old, scratched, waiting like it had a role in this scene. The leader flicked his fingers toward the open back seat. "She comes with us. Show her around. Show her how things work." Samantha froze. She didn't want to get in that car. Every part of her told her it was a mistake. But all eyes were on her and on Lobby. He stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Samantha, it's better if you come. Just once. They'll leave you alone after that." Her chest ached. She didn't know if she believed him. She didn't even know if she still recognized him. But the hands at her back, the expectant stares, the weight of the hood itself, it all pushed her forward. The door shut behind her with a heavy thud. The car rumbled to life, carrying her deeper into the city, deeper into a world she hadn't chosen, but one that had already chosen her. Chapter 5. The car ride felt longer than it really was. The back seat smelled like pickles and old fast food, and the air conditioning had been dead for years. Every time Samantha shifted, the cracked vinyl seat squeaked like it was protesting. The leader drove with his cap pulled so low it seemed impossible for him to see the road. The guy in the passenger seat laughed at videos on his phone the whole way, which was more unsettling than reassuring. Lobby sat next to Samantha, quiet. He kept staring out the window with his jaw tight, like he was pretending this was just a casual drive to practice instead of something heavier. "Where were we going?" Samantha asked finally. The leader didn't answer right away. When he did, it was casual, almost lazy. "Headquarters." Her stomach twisted. That word carried weight. When they finally pulled into the alley, she realized headquarters might have been overselling it. It wasn't some menacing fortress. It wasn't even cool. It was an abandoned laundromat, half the sign missing so it just read Dromat. Inside, the place smelled faintly of bleach and dust. A single light bulb flickered overhead, buzzing like it wanted to quit. There were couches with stuffing spilling out of them, their springs ready to stab anyone brave enough to sit down. And on the biggest couch sat the boss. He looked older than the rest, maybe late 30s. His beard was scruffy but kept just enough to look deliberate. A knife was tucked into his belt, balanced against a faded T-shirt that read, "World's Best Uncle." Lobby shifted when he saw him, and that was all it took for Samantha's chest to tighten. Lobby wasn't scared of much. If he looked small here, it meant something. "Boss," the leader said, motioning toward Samantha. "This is her, Lobby's friend." The boss leaned forward, elbows on his knees, studying her. His stare was sharp, heavy. Finally, he spoke. "So, you're new." Samantha considered being bold. Instead, what came out was, "I like your shirt." The room went silent. The boss blinked twice, then chuckled low in his throat. Lobby let out a breath, like he'd been holding it the entire car ride. "Sit," the boss said, gesturing to a chair in the corner. It wobbled as Samantha lowered herself into it, one spring groaning like it was threatening her. The boss leaned back. "Do you know where you are?" Samantha glanced around at the graffitied walls, the broken machines, the sad furniture. "A laundromat?" The boss smirked. "Headquarters." For the next half hour, Samantha sat through what felt like a lecture. Rules were laid out, where they could walk, who they owed respect to, how loyalty mattered more than anything. Words like stripes and the code were repeated over and over. Everyone in the room nodded along as though they'd heard it all before. It was hard to take the place seriously. The peeling paint, the flickering light, the faint smell of old socks. But something in the boss's tone made it clear this wasn't a joke. What unsettled her most was the way he kept looking at Lobby. Like Lobby owed him something. Like Lobby was already in too deep. At last, the boss stood and stretched. "All right, she's fine. She's with Lobby. But she learns quick or she's out." The way he said, "out," didn't need explaining. They filed back outside into the humid night. Samantha's legs felt heavier than ever. Lobby finally spoke, his voice quiet. "I'll explain later." She wanted to believe him, but as the door to the laundromat creaked shut behind them, she couldn't shake the feeling that things had shifted. This wasn't just a summer anymore. This was something darker. Chapter 6. George had built his own gang from scratch, recruiting people who were fast, smart, and loyal to him alone. Within weeks, they had claimed a small but valuable slice of the neighborhood. The streets had noticed. The other gangs had noticed. And, most importantly, Samantha and Lobby's gang leader had noticed. George's rising influence and his crew's confidence were a threat that needed to be eliminated. George stood in Isabella's apartment, leaning casually against the doorway. His gang had grown quickly, and he knew that every step he took had consequences. Isabella was smart, capable, the kind of person who could be a valuable member of his crew. "George," Isabella said, crossing her arms. "Why are you here?" "I wanted to talk," he replied smoothly. "I know you've been thinking about it. You'd fit with us. My gang, it's a good fit for someone like you." "Someone like me?" she asked skeptically. "Yes," he said, shrugging as if it were obvious. "Strong, capable, smart. You'd be safer with us than alone. Loyalty, respect, friends who have your back." "Safer?" Isabella echoed. "George, it's a gang. Knives, fights, shootings. How is that safer?" George's grin stayed calm, almost too calm. "Perspective. One last chance. Join us, or, well, you've already decided." "I said no," Isabella said firmly. George nodded slowly and pulled out his phone. He spoke quietly into it. She won't cooperate. Seconds later, the door slammed open. His gang flooded in, moving with practiced precision. Shadows shifted across the cracked walls as they surrounded Isabella. George stayed back, watching. He gave her one last look, a silent warning. Then the shots rang out. George's eyes remained fixed on her as she collapsed. The room went silent, except for the creak of the floorboards and the faint hum of the city outside. George stepped over the remnants of the struggle and walked out. His gang followed without a word. The apartment was left in ruin. A crooked lamp, a sagging couch, and the faint smell of smoke and dust. 3 days later, Samantha sat in the passenger seat of Lobby's car, gripping the edge of the seat. They were driving toward George's apartment. The street smelled of hot asphalt and trash, and pigeons flapped over toppled garbage cans. "Try not to think about it," Lobby said quietly. "Focus on the job." The job was simple in theory. Sneak into George's apartment while he was alone, neutralize him, and get out without being seen. Their gang leader wanted him gone. George's gang was a threat, and that was reason enough. Samantha tried to focus on small, trivial things. The cracked stoplight, a stray cat hopping over a dumpster, the peeling paint on buildings. But her thoughts always returned to George, her boyfriend, the target. "We have to do this," Lobby said, breaking her train of thought. "Our leader wants him gone. If we don't, someone else will try, and it won't be clean. We're the best shot at it." Samantha swallowed hard. "I know, but—" Her voice faltered. She couldn't imagine pulling the trigger on him. Couldn't imagine the weight of that action. They parked a block away from George's building. A soft breeze stirred scraps of paper along the sidewalk. "You stay here," Lobby instructed. "Cover me. Watch for anyone approaching." Samantha nodded, hands trembling. Lobby slipped out, moving carefully toward the building. Every creak of the boards beneath him sounded like thunder. Inside, Lobby paused at the window, listening. George was inside, unaware. His voice, confident and casual, carried through the apartment. Lobby moved cautiously toward him, and then Samantha's heart jumped. George noticed. Stronger, bigger, faster. He pinned Lobby almost immediately. Samantha raised her weapon. Her finger hovered over the trigger. Her mind raced. This was her boyfriend, the man she cared about. Can I really do this? Am I supposed to just end him? Her finger twitched. She thought of the gang leader's orders, the reason for the mission, the streets outside, the consequences of failure. And yet, her heart screamed no. She stuttered, whispering, I can't. She imagined every possible outcome. If she hesitated, if she missed, if she fired, each possibility spun like a storm in her head. The weight of the act pressed down on her chest. Her finger pressed down slightly, trembling. She stuttered again. She fired. The sound echoed into morning, blending with the hum of the city and the faint rustle of pigeons. Samantha stayed crouched, listening, waiting, and then she saw a puddle of blood, not coming from George, but coming from Lobby. Chapter 7. It had been 2 days since the so-called accident. Samantha had spun the story carefully. Lobby had been overpowered by George during the mission, a clean tragedy no one could have predicted. No one questioned her version. It fit the narrative, and in this neighborhood, Everyone knew that facts were flexible. Meanwhile, she had recruited Bobby. Convincing him had taken some effort. A mix of charm, subtle intimidation, and a few strategic exaggerations about the perks of gang life. Now he was officially in, and today was his first real mission. Samantha couldn't help but feel a strange mix of excitement and dread. They drove through the streets toward their target, the hum of the car engine mixing with the chaotic noises of the neighborhood. Sirens in the distance, pigeons squawking over overturned trash cans, a stray cat darting across the road. The city seemed alive with tension. So, Samantha began, keeping her voice casual. Here's the plan. The diamond is in the vault on the second floor. Security cameras, silent alarms, motion sensors, the works. We're going to bypass all of it, get the diamond, and be gone before anyone even notices. Bobby nodded, trying to hide his nerves. And you've done this before? Not exactly, Samantha said, smirking slightly. But I've watched enough heist movies to know what's supposed to happen. They laughed quietly, a tension-relieving sound, before diving into the real discussion. Samantha explained the timing. The guards rotated every 20 minutes. The camera blind spots at precise angles, and the vents they could use to avoid detection. She outlined contingencies if someone walked in unexpectedly, how to distract alarms, even the escape routes once they had the diamond in hand. Bobby's eyes widened at every detail. And you're sure this will work? It will, Samantha said firmly, though the butterflies in her stomach suggested otherwise. We just need to stick to the plan, stay quiet, and trust each other. The bank loomed ahead, its marble facade glowing under the morning sun. Samantha parked a block away. They slipped out of the car, moving carefully through shadows, scanning for cameras and guards. Every clatter of a trash can lid or squeak of a shoe made them freeze, hearts hammering. Once inside, they navigated through hallways with practiced stealth, reaching the vault door. Samantha tapped in the codes, a trick she had learned from an old guidebook she kept hidden in her apartment. The door swung open silently. Inside, the diamond glimmered, tucked into a small reinforced case. Bobby's hand shook slightly as he reached for it. Samantha steadied him with a reassuring look. They secured the gem, retracing their steps to the exit with equal precision. Back in the car, Samantha started the engine, adrenaline surging. They began driving toward the gang base, the city streets humming with their combined tension and triumph. But then, flashing red and blue lights appeared behind them. Police. Stay calm, Samantha whispered. We do exactly what they say. They pulled over. Officers approached, guns drawn but careful. Questions were asked. Confiscation followed. Handcuffs snapped around their wrists. Bobby groaned. Samantha's stomach sank. The diamond was gone, impounded as evidence. Minutes later, they were sitting side by side in a cold, fluorescent-lit holding cell, the distant echo of other arrestees filling the room. Samantha stared at the wall, thinking about how quickly a flawless plan could collapse. Bobby sat beside her, shaking slightly. Well, he said, voice shaky. First mission went okay? Samantha shot him a look. Not exactly what we expected. Huh? They both laughed weakly, but the tension remained. Outside, the city continued its chaotic rhythm, indifferent to the failures and triumphs of two young gang members. The holding cell smelled of bleach and old sweat, a combination that made Samantha wrinkle her nose. She sat on the hard bench, glancing at Bobby, who was nervously tapping his foot against the cold concrete floor. Do you think George knows yet? Bobby asked quietly, his voice almost swallowed by the echoes of the cell. Samantha shrugged. He'll hear eventually, probably from the news before anyone tells him directly. But that's not our problem right now. Bobby's eyes widened. Not our problem? We just got arrested for a bank heist. That seems like a pretty big problem. Perspective, Samantha said, leaning back against the wall. We stick to our story, and maybe, just maybe, we walk out of here without more trouble. It's not like they can throw us in the slammer forever without questioning things. Bobby ran a hand through his hair. I think they can, at least for a while. And the diamond? Gone. Poof. Just like that. Samantha glanced at him and smirked faintly. It's not gone. It's evidence now. Eventually, we'll figure out how to get it back. For now, we survive. That's the first rule. The sound of distant cell doors clanging made them both jump. Another batch of arrestees shuffled by, complaining loudly. Samantha watched them, taking mental notes. In a way, jail was like the streets, chaotic, noisy, and full of people with unpredictable tempers. Bobby leaned closer. So, what's our next move? Wait, Samantha said firmly. Observe, stay quiet, and learn. There's always a next move, but if we start panicking now, we're screwed. Simple as that. He nodded slowly, still jittery. Right. Simple. Samantha tilted her head, glancing around the cell. And hey, try to find the humor in it. Not everything is death and destruction. Some of it's just ridiculous. Like, who built these benches anyway? They're really uncomfortable. Bobby managed a small chuckle. Yeah, I guess even jail has its funny side. Samantha smirked, her eyes scanning the small barred window above them. Exactly. And that's how we survive. Not by panicking. Not by overthinking. By finding the small, ridiculous parts and using them to keep our heads clear. Outside, the hum of the hood continued. Somewhere, sirens wailed, pigeons scattered, and life went on, indifferent to two young gang members sitting in a cold cell, wondering if they'd make it out alive. Chapter 8. George had just finished his morning coffee when he got the news. Samantha and Bobby had been arrested for a bank robbery. He blinked. What on earth were they thinking? Without hesitating, he grabbed his wallet. $5,000. It was a lot for just two people, but George didn't care. He needed them out of that cell before the situation spiraled further. By the time George arrived at the police station, Samantha and Bobby were being let out of holding doors, blinking into the harsh sunlight. Their eyes widened when they saw him. George. Samantha exclaimed, rushing forward. Thank you so much. Yeah. Seriously, Bobby added, rubbing his wrist where the cuffs had been. We didn't expect this. Thanks. Of course, George said, his voice firm but concerned. Now you two explain what exactly happened. Why were you even at that bank? Samantha exchanged a nervous glance with Bobby. It's complicated, she began. It was supposed to be a job. Our gang thought it was worth a shot, but... Wait, George interrupted, raising an eyebrow. Your gang? You mean the one with Lobby? She nodded. Yeah, but it went wrong. Really wrong. We didn't plan for the police to show up. Bobby fidgeted. I thought we could just get in and out, you know? Easy. George's jaw tightened. Easy doesn't usually involve being handcuffed and put in a cell. You could have been seriously hurt, or worse. Samantha sighed. I know, George. It was stupid. We weren't thinking straight. We just wanted to prove ourselves, I guess. George crossed his arms, his expression somewhere between exasperated and worried. Prove yourselves? By robbing a bank? And you didn't even tell me? Do you realize how much trouble you could have caused? Bobby swallowed hard. We didn't want you involved. We thought we could handle it on our own. Handle it. George repeated, incredulous. You've got no idea how big this could have gotten. You could have ended up in real trouble for a long time. Samantha's eyes softened. We know, and we're sorry. That's why we're out now. Thanks to you. George shook his head, letting out a long breath. Just think next time before doing something like that. No more secrets. Got it. Both nodded quickly, relief flooding their faces. After a few more minutes of tense questioning and exclamations about what went wrong, the three of them stood outside the jail. The street was noisy, full of cars and people going about their morning. George handed the diamond-related paperwork back to them, his expression a mix of frustration and worry. Samantha and George exchanged a look, something unspoken but heavier than before. Without thinking, George leaned slightly forward and Samantha met him halfway, their lips brushing in a brief, fleeting kiss. I should go, Samantha murmured, stepping back. She picked up her bag, slipping quietly down the sidewalk toward her apartment. Bobby followed after a few minutes, giving George one last grateful glance. Thanks, George, he said again. Really? George watched them go, then noticed something on the table. Samantha had left her phone behind, pocketing it. He got into his car, driving toward her apartment to return it. When he arrived, the door was unlocked. He didn't bother knocking. He stepped inside, calling her name softly. The apartment was quiet. Then he froze. There she was, Samantha, kissing someone. George's eyes widened. Before he could process who it was, the person jumped out the window. Gone. Samantha turned around, startled. "George!" she exclaimed, eyes wide. He could only stare, heart pounding, unsure what to say or do next. Chapter 9. The next day dawned gray and heavy. Samantha had called George countless times, leaving frantic messages. Each one tried to explain, to reason, to apologize. But George hadn't answered. He didn't want to hear it. Not yet. His heartache had transformed overnight into something sharper, something colder, anger. By late morning, he gathered his gang in the empty warehouse they used for strategy sessions. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Samantha and Bobby's gang, George began, voice low and controlled, has 2 days to prepare. 2 days to get ready for the fight of their lives. Or we wipe them out. Every single member, every hideout, everything. If anyone stands in our way, they're gone. His gang members exchanged glances. Murmurs spread to the room as orders were sent, messages typed, confirmations received. George's eyes, however, never wavered from plan. There was no room for error. Meanwhile, Samantha was pacing in her apartment, phone in hand. She had already tried every possible way to convince George to call off the fight. Her voice trembled as she admitted her mistakes. "I know I was wrong," she begged in one call. "But it wasn't Bobby. Please, George, don't do this. Don't hurt anyone else. Please." George sat in his car outside her apartment, gripping the steering wheel as he considered her words. He thought it through, every possible scenario. And in the back of his mind, a single thought prevailed. It must have been Bobby. There was no other explanation in his eyes. He hung up and drove back to his gang, cold determination settling over him. Samantha, Bobby, and their entire gang would pay. Samantha, on the other side of town, convened with her gang. The leader stood in the center, hands planted firmly on his hips. "We fight," he said, voice sharp. "Every member, for the safety of the gang." Samantha muttered under her breath, almost to herself. "Safety? No, it's just so we can show dominance." 3 days later, the street where the two gangs would meet lay abandoned, cracked asphalt stretching between broken-down buildings. Rusted cars and scattered debris littered the edges, making the perfect battlefield. Both gangs arrived in waves, 30 members each, eyes scanning, weapons gripped, muscles tense. The first clash came quickly. Shadows darted across the street as members of each gang threw makeshift weapons, sticks, bats, even bricks. Dust kicked into the air with every scuffle, shouts echoing between buildings, creating a chaotic symphony. Samantha ducked behind a crumbling wall, breath shallow, heart pounding. She could see George across the street, moving with precision, giving orders, eyes cold as steel. The fight escalated quickly. Members grappled, shoved, threw punches, dust-choked lungs. Fists connected with bodies, and the echo of impact carried across the abandoned street. Samantha's focus narrowed. She needed to survive and protect Bobby at all costs. A sudden surge of movement pushed her backward, and she tripped over a loose piece of debris. Arms flailed. She fell hard against the rough pavement, and when she looked up, George loomed above her. His gun was pointed directly at her chest, unwavering. Samantha's pulse raced. The world seemed to slow around her, dust hanging like fog. She locked eyes with George, a mixture of fear and determination in her gaze. "You can kill me," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "But just don't hurt Bobby." George's eyes narrowed, the gun still leveled. "Why shouldn't I?" he asked, voice low and dangerous, every word slicing through the chaos around them. Samantha swallowed, a single bead of sweat running down her temple. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, yet every word cut through the tension like a blade. It wasn't Bobby. It was... Chapter 10. Samantha's back pressed hard against the cracked asphalt. Her arms were pinned at awkward angles, dust and grit in her hair and eyes, heart hammering so fast it felt like it might burst. George loomed over her, a gun steady in his hands. The chaos around them roared like a storm. Shouting, punches, bodies colliding, but all she could focus on was a question he repeated, low and furious. "Tell me who it was." Her pulse slammed at her ears. She dared a glance across the street, and then she saw him. Tobby, tall, broad-shouldered, smirk as familiar as summer lightning playing across his face. He moved with confidence, flanked by a dozen of his own gang members, his presence commanding. The sight made Samantha's stomach twist into knots, the past colliding violently with the present. In an instant, she was transported 2 years back to the warm, hazy evening of Tobby's going-away party. The backyard smelled of barbecue smoke, grass, and soda. Laughter floated on the breeze as balloons bobbed along the fence. Tobby had leaned against the wood with that same half-smirk, tall and muscular, teasing anyone who dared challenge him. Sharp and intimidating, yet somehow impossible not to like. Isabella had wandered up to him, holding a cup of soda, trying to sound casual. "Where exactly are you moving?" she asked, voice light, though the weight of impending goodbye was under every word. Tobby had shrugged, smirk deepening. "Just somewhere new," he said, calm and certain. "Some neighborhood where it makes sense for me. You'll hear about it eventually." Samantha's chest tightened. The memory felt impossibly close. The warmth and laughter that night, now a stark contrast to the gunmetal tension pressing down on her in the abandoned street. She pointed shakily, voice barely audible over the shouts and crashes. It was Tobby. George's face went red with fury. In a blur of movement, he shoved it aside and charged toward Tobby, muscles taut, every ounce of rage driving him forward. The two gangs collided immediately, fists and feet moving in a chaotic storm, shouts echoing off the abandoned buildings. Samantha tried to move, to follow, but the crush of bodies pinned her. She twisted her head desperately and saw Bobby, struggling against a much larger man. His arms flailed, his legs kicked, but he was pinned hard to the ground. Samantha raised her gun, but by the time she could steady her shaking hands, he lay still, motionless. Blood ran across the asphalt. Her stomach dropped. She thought he was dead. Around her, chaos ruled. The air was thick with dust and smoke. Fists collided with heads, kicks connected with ribs, and screams layered over one another. Tobby and George clashed in the center of it all, the power of two strong, furious men ripping to the opposing sides. The world seemed to tilt, minutes stretching into eternity. She caught glimpses of friends and enemies, falling and rising, the battle an endless tide of bodies, cries, and the thunder of movement. The memory of Tobby, the light-hearted summer evening, haunted her with its normalcy, making the violence of the present feel even more surreal. Then came the sirens. Red and blue lights cut across the dust, flashing over asphalt, broken walls, and scattered debris. Police cars skidded to a stop at either end of the street. Officers jumped out, shouting, guns raised, ordering everyone down. Slowly, the fight began to collapse under the weight of authority. Samantha sat there, pressed against the cracked ground, chest heaving, dust covering her skin and hair. The shouts died down, the chaos settling into grim silence. Around her lay the remnants of the battle. George, Tobby, members of both gangs strewn across the street. She tried to reach Bobby, but he didn't move. He lay there, still, covered in blood. Tears stung her eyes. She couldn't tell if he was alive or gone. For the first time, the full weight of everything, the hood, the gangs, the betrayals, the violence, pressed down on her. She was the last of her friends left. Samantha lowered her head, letting the ache wash over her, the grief, the exhaustion, the heavy loneliness. She whispered their names, letting the memories of summer nights, laughter, and friendship float into the still night air. All around her, dust and silence ruled. The fight was over. The hood had taken them all, leaving Samantha to stare at the cracked asphalt, at the shattered remains of what had been her life, and to carry with her the weight of being the last one standing. Chapter 11. For months had passed since the chaos of that day. The hood, once a jagged scar of gangs and fear, had slowly begun to change. The streets were cleaner, quieter, and more families and ordinary people had started moving in. Graffiti still lingered on some walls, reminders of the past, but the constant sirens and shouting had lessened. The air carried a tentative sense of normalcy, the kind that suggested life might finally continue. Samantha had settled into her new home, a modest, sturdy place on a street lined with small trees and cracking sidewalks. It was hers now. She had worked tirelessly to save up, to claim a space that could be hers alone, a place where she could start to heal. And yet, despite the walls and the quiet, a hollow ache lingered in her chest. Memories of the fights, of George, of the friends she had lost, of the mistakes she had made. It all remained. One bright, warm afternoon, a soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She set down the book she had been reading and walked to answer it, expecting perhaps a neighbor or the mailman. When she opened the door, she froze. There, standing in the sunlight, was Bobby, and in his hands, a bouquet of slightly crooked but colorful flowers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Samantha blinked, the memories of that night flashing through her mind. "Bobby, how are you alive?" She finally managed, her voice shaky, disbelief threaded through every word. Bobby smiled faintly, a little sheepishly. "Let's just say luck, timing, and some quick thinking," he replied. "I made it. I want to come back, to make sure you were okay." Samantha stepped aside to let him in, still holding the flowers. Inside they sat, talking for hours, recounting the events, filling in gaps, explaining choices, and sharing regrets. They laughed at absurd moments. They cried over losses, and they remembered the friends they could no longer see. By the end of that long conversation, a sense of peace settled between them. There were scars, certainly, and things that would never be forgotten, but there was also a foundation, trust, understanding, and a quiet love that had survived despite the chaos. The months turned into years. Samantha and Bobby rebuilt their lives together, slowly weaving their love into the fabric of the neighborhood. They bought a slightly larger house when the hood grew safer, painted the walls in warm, cheerful colors, and planted a small garden where flowers and vegetables could grow side by side. Eventually, they married in a simple ceremony with a few friends from outside the hood who had remained by their side. Their love, tested by fire and loss, became the anchor for their small family. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, who grew up hearing tales of resilience and the importance of loyalty, courage, and love. Though life carried its ordinary challenges, bills, school, minor disputes with neighbors, the shadows of the past no longer ruled their days. The hood continued to evolve, slowly but steadily. New families arrived, shops opened, streets became safer, and laughter began to echo in places where it hadn't been heard in years. Samantha and Bobby never left. They chose to stay, to be part of the change, to show their children what it meant to survive, to rebuild, and to thrive in a place that had once taken so much from them. Their lives were far from perfect, but they were theirs, and together they found a peace they hadn't thought possible. And though the past never fully disappeared, it became a story to tell, a lesson in endurance, and a reminder that even in the darkest corners, light could grow. The end. Thank you for listening.